Hello, Mr. Hardy here, and in this video I would like to teach you about the poem The Destruction of Sennnacherib by Lord Byron. So we'll start by reading The Destruction of Sennnacherib by Byron. We'll then go through it stanza by stanza to check we understand what's going on in the poem. I'll then identify the poem's message and some key areas of conflict you can explore. We'll then go through the poem again, identifying key linguistic, structural and poetic techniques that Byron has used and you may want to use in your exam. I'll then leave you with a couple of tasks you can do at the end of the video, including a exam-style question should you wish to answer it. So, who was our poet Lord Byron? Well, Lord Byron was a British poet. He was born in 1788 and he died in 1824. And his name was George Gordon Byron, and he had a title, 6th Baron Byron. So altogether, you would refer to him as George Gordon Byron, 6th Baron Byron, which is a bit of a mouthful, it's a bit of a tongue twister. So he was referred to as Lord Byron, and it is okay for you to do the same in the exam, refer to him as Lord Byron. He was an English romantic. Now, if you have watched my boat stealing video, which is a poem by William Wordsworth, you were introduced to the Romanticism movement. It was an artistic movement in England at the time, and it was focused on exploring individual people's experiences of the world and of life. It valued emotions over reason and logic, and it was really interested in nature, and particularly the relationship between man and nature and the power of nature. Now, those three things were really relevant to boat stealing, but there were other things that romantics were interested in, and one of those other things is the unknown. So this is the idea of something beyond the tangible, beyond something you can touch, maybe the idea of a god or an angel or a spirit or some other realm or world. And this was a common feature in romantic art, and we get an element of this in The Destruction of Sennnacherib. Lord Byron lived in England, and then he moved to Italy, and then he moved to Greece, where I believe he ended up dying in war, fighting off the Ottoman invasion of Greece. The reason I include this is that not all poets are boring people who live in libraries and read and write. Some of them live quite extraordinary, interesting lives, and Lord Byron was certainly one of those people. Lord Byron was raised Presbyterian. Presbyterian is a type of Christianity, a branch of Christianity. So Lord Byron was well versed in the Bible, he'd read it, he knew about God. Whilst as an adult he never really subscribed to an organised religion, he maintained his interest in the Bible and his belief in a God, and that comes through in the poem The Destruction of Sennnacherib. So some of my students think Sennacherib is a place that got destroyed, which is what the title of the poem suggests. But Sennacherib was actually a person. He was the king of Assyria and the Assyrian Empire. Now, Assyria is where we would identify modern-day Iran, so the Middle East. And their empire, which was aptly called the Assyrian Empire, existed for a really long time, 2025 BC to 612 BC. And it was a really successful empire geographically as well. They spread and conquered parts of the Mediterranean, including the island of Cyprus. They spread into Africa and conquered countries like Egypt. And they conquered pretty much most of the Middle East. So it was a very powerful empire that existed for a long time. And they were very famous for being powerful, ruthless warriors that were not often defeated. So Sennacherib was a king of Assyria from 705 to 681 BC. And quite early on in his reign, 4 years into his reign, he decided to attack Jerusalem in 701 BC. So Judah, which is like modern-day Israel, Judah was a region in the Middle East which had many different settlements and dwellings, and Jerusalem was the capital. It was like the crown of the Judah kingdom, and the king of Jerusalem at the time was someone called King Hezekiah. So what Sennacherib and the Assyrian Empire did is they conquered some of the smaller settlements in Judah, and finally they were going to do their big invasion and try and conquer the capital of Jerusalem and capture King Hezekiah, and then they could add Judah to their ever-growing powerful empire. And this poem, The Destruction of Sennnacherib, is all about Sennacherib and his Assyrian army going to invade Jerusalem, and what happens during that battle. So let's get straight into it. The Destruction of Sennnacherib by Lord Byron. The Assyrian came down like the wolf from the fold, and his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold, and the sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea, when the blue waves rolls nightly on deep Galilee. Like the leaves of the forest when summer is green, that host with their banners at sunset were seen. Like the leaves of the forest when autumn hath blown, that host on the morrow lay withered and strown. For the angel of death spread his wings on the blast, and breathed in the face of the foe as he passed. And the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill, and their hearts but once heaved and forever grew still. And there lay the steed with his nostril all wide, but through it there rolled not the breath of his pride. And the foam of his gasping lay white on the turf, and cold as the spray of the rock-beating surf. And there lay the rider distorted and pale, with the dew on his brow and the rust on his mail. And the tents were all silent, the banners alone, the lances unlifted, the trumpet unblown. And the widows of Asher are loud in their wail, and the idols are broke in the temple of Baal. And the might of the Gentile, unsmote by the sword, have melted like snow in the glance of the Lord. So there you have it. That is a 6-stanza poem, The Destruction of Sennnacherib by Lord Byron. So what is going on, and how does this battle play out? Well, in stanza 1, Byron details how the Assyrian army approaches Jerusalem looking glorious and intimidating. And he does this through a couple of similes. Like the wolf in the fold describes the soldiers like fierce wolves, and the simile like stars on the sea suggests that the Assyrian army, the number of soldiers was immense, uncalculable, like the stars in the sky being reflected by the sea. We know from biblical historical accounts that there was actually 185,000 Assyrian soldiers who went to attack Jerusalem. That is a lot of people indeed. It looked almost certain to any spectator or bystander that the Assyrian army would conquer Jerusalem. They were that fierce, there was that many of them, they were that powerful. But in stanza 2, Lord Byron foreshadows the Assyrian army's upcoming defeat, surprise defeat to be honest. And he does this through seasonal similes. So he describes the soldiers like leaves, and they start off like leaves in the summer, which are green and strong, but they end the poem like leaves in autumn, which are sort of brown and dead. This suggests that they might be defeated and they might end up being killed. Stanza 3 details how the angel of death, which is the title that Lord Byron uses, in the Bible it's referred to as the angel of the Lord or the angel of God, has intervened in this battle on behalf of Jerusalem and King Hezekiah and has killed the Assyrian army. Quite literally all 185,000 soldiers have been wiped out by this angel overnight. Stanza 4 zooms in on a dead Assyrian horse, and a horse is, quite a powerful animal, and they would have been sort of like the symbol of the Assyrian army's power. Having lots of strong horses were almost a sign that you were going to win in battle, and now having a dead horse is like the pride of the Assyrian Empire. All their power has sort of been destroyed by this angel of God. Stanza 4 zooms in on a dead Assyrian soldier who presumably was with the horse at the time, and it really focuses on how this angel of the Lord, this angel of death, has destroyed the Assyrian army, and they are left silent and dead and 100% defeated. The final stanza, stanza 6, Lord Byron details how God has defeated the Assyrian army quite comprehensively. Even though no other humans could defeat them, there was some kind of divine or spiritual intervention that led to Jerusalem not being conquered by the powerful Assyrian Empire under King Sennacherib. And that is the story that the poem recounts. So what is the poem's message? Well, the Destruction of Sennnacherib by Lord Byron is an biblically inspired poem that recounts how God defeated the Assyrians and King Sennacherib in Jerusalem. And that is what the poem is all about. It is a narrative poem, and it narrates this biblical and historical episode from the Middle East. So where can we see conflict in this poem? Well, there's certainly physical conflict. Sennacherib and his Assyrian army has approached Jerusalem and King Hezekiah in order to fight and conquer them. So there was going to be violent conflict involving horses and swords and shields and loss of life. So there's definitely a conflict between Sennacherib and Hezekiah. And if you read the biblical account, which you can find in 2 Kings, Sennacherib and Hezekiah sent messages to each other and sort of letters threatening each other and trying to sort of outwit each other. So there was definitely a personal conflict going on. But then, of course, the Assyrian Empire and the kingdom of Judah would have been involved in this conflict as well. And again, we know from other historical accounts, particularly from the Assyrians themselves, who kept their historical records on clay. They used to inscribe their history on clay. We know that they'd conquered other parts of Judah. So there was definitely war and physical conflict between the Assyrian Empire and the kingdom of Judah. We also get physical conflict from the angel of death. In the Bible, it's often referred to as the angel of the Lord or the angel of God, coming into the battle and sort of supernaturally affecting the outcome and single-handedly killing 185,000 Assyrian soldiers and effectively handing the victory to King Hezekiah and Judah, and in particular Jerusalem, the capital. We get sort of a spiritual conflict. So King Hezekiah, if you read the biblical account of him, he was a fairly good king of Judah. And what he did is he tried to get rid of all the people who were worshipping idols, so false gods such as Baal, for example. Baal is a god that looks a bit like a bull, has the head of a bull, has horns, and according to the people of Judah, and in particular King Hezekiah, that wasn't the one true living God. So Hezekiah was trying to get rid of all these idols and promote his people to believe in the one true God. And this battle represents a spiritual conflict where the one true God comes to help out his people, the kingdom of Judah, and in particular Jerusalem, and defeat some of the idols or false gods that other people worshipped. So whilst there was a physical conflict, there was also a spiritual battle going on about who humans should believe in as their God. And ultimately, the Christian God or the monotheism God has beaten the idols and the polytheistic gods. We get some historical conflict as well. So in the Bible, in the book of 2 Kings, we get the account of King Hezekiah and Sennacherib and this battle and the angel of the Lord coming along and killing 185,000 soldiers. However, the Assyrians have a slightly different account. I mentioned that they kept their history on clay, and that those clay remnants of their history have survived, and historians have translated what they'd written down. And according to the Assyrians, they weren't defeated. Basically, they trapped King Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem within their city walls and sort of left them there, and then went on to conquer other places in their empire. So according to the Assyrians, they didn't suffer a huge defeat, which is what the people of Judah said they did in the biblical account. So from a historical point of view, how true is it that God's angel, the angel of death or the angel of the Lord, came down and killed 185,000 people? Or is actually the Assyrians' historical record true, that they trapped King Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem inside their city walls? There's ongoing conflict there. Who knows? So let's explore some of the techniques that Lord Byron has used in this poem. Linguistically, Byron has made use of similes, colour connotations, symbolism, alliteration, and onomatopoeia. Structurally, the Destruction of Sennnacherib is arranged in 6 stanzas, and each stanza is a quatrain. That means they are 4-line stanzas. And actually, each line of the stanza follows a certain metre. We call this metre anapestic tetrameter, I'll explain what that is a little bit later and the effect it has. Byron has employed rhyming couplets. That means two successive lines, so 2 lines in a row, rhyme. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a narrative poem. Its job is to tell this historical event, and Byron has chosen to tell the biblically inspired event. Poetically, there is use of end-stopping, contrast, imagery, and caesura. So, stanza 1. Let's go through it. The Assyrian came down like the wolf on the fold. This is a simile that compares Assyrian soldiers to wolves. Now, wolves hunt in packs. They're deadly, they have sharp teeth, they have claws, they often kill their prey quite violently. This portrays how intimidating, violent, and forceful the Assyrian army are. So again, it emphasizes that the Assyrians really were the number one bet to win the battle here. They were definitely going to win. They are that powerful, like a wolf. And his cohorts were gleaming in purple and gold. So in line 2, we get some colour connotations. Purple is a really hard dye to make. So in order to have purple clothes, you have to have quite a powerful, rich, and clever empire, which clearly King Sennacherib has, because he's able to afford to dress his soldiers in purple in a very rich colour. We also know that gold has connotations of being rich as well. Gold is a precious metal, and again, King Sennacherib has so much gold in his empire that he can afford to dress his soldiers in gold, and that shows just how powerful the Assyrian Empire was. Again, much more powerful than the Kingdom of Judah, so it looked for certain like the Assyrians would win this battle. And the sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea. There is definitely a simile here, so it's comparing the soldiers, the Assyrian soldiers, to stars that are being reflected on the Sea of Galilee. If you look up at night, on a clear night in particular, you will see thousands of stars, millions actually. But we know from the Bible and other historical records that there were 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. That is a lot of people indeed, a bit like the innumerable number of stars in the sky. I want to draw your attention as well to the alliteration in the third line as well. Sheen, spears, stars, sea. We have that repeated S sound. I also want to teach you a poetic technique, sibilance. Sibilance is basically alliteration of the S sound in particular. And you find it in poetry, and it can sometimes create a sinister effect, a bit like a snake hissing, or it can sometimes create quite a calming, soft shh effect. I'll let you work out which one you think it is here. Is it a sinister snake-like effect or a calming, relaxing, calm before the storm effect? Line 4, when the blue waves roll nightly on deep Galilee. We get colour connotations of blue, so we get some really nice imagery that Byron's using, and in particular night imagery. So in green you'll see words like gleaming, gold, sheen, stars, nightly. This sort of paints a really nice picture of a beautiful clear night where you can see lots of stars. And we know from the Bible that the angel of the Lord, or the angel of death, came in the night to kill the 185,000 Assyrian soldiers. We have rhyming couplets, so fold and gold rhyme, and they're next to each other, lines 1 and 2. Sea and Galilee rhyme, lines 3 and 4, they're next to each other, so we call it rhyming couplets. Galilee is a lake in modern day Israel, and it's a lake that's so big that it's referred to as the Sea of Galilee, but it's not the sea, it's a lake, it's surrounded by land. I want to talk a bit about the meter, anapestic tetrameter. An anapest is when you have 3 syllables, 3 sounds, and the first 2 are unstressed and the third one is stressed. So it creates a dee-dee-dum effect. 2 unstressed, 1 stressed. Tetrameter simply means 4 of them. So we have 4 lots of dee-dee-dum, unstressed, unstressed, stressed. So we have a total of 12 syllables in each line, and this is true throughout each line in all the stanzas in the poem. A really good example of this would be line 3, so let me read it out to you and see if you can listen out for the stressed sounds and the meter, the rhythm it creates. And the sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea. Sheen, spears, stars and sea are our stressed sounds, and the of there was like on the are our unstressed sounds. So it creates a rhythm. And the sheen of their spears was like stars on the sea. Da-da-dum, 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 da-da-dum. And that is anapestic tetrameter. And it sort of has a marching effect, or maybe a galloping effect, like soldiers on their horses. And we know from historical accounts that fighting on horses was a big part of combat in this era and in this geographical region. And the rhythm, coupled with the rhyming couplets, sort of creates an onward drive, an onward force that guides us through this narrative poem, that guides us through the battle from beginning to end. Okay, stanza 2. Like the leaves of the forest when summer is green. So the first line of stanza 2 is a simile, and this simile compares the Assyrian soldiers to leaves, particularly leaves in summer. So in summertime, the weather is good. Trees and bushes and plants are growing their leaves, their foliage. The leaves are young, strong, healthy, and this reflects the Assyrian army. Their soldiers are young, strong, healthy. They're in such good condition, it's almost certain they're going to win this battle. But then we get another simile in the third line of the second stanza, like the leaves of the forest when autumn have blown. Now the poet Byron is comparing the Assyrian soldiers to leaves in autumn. And autumn is the season where leaves die, or plants that shed their leaves, that their leaves die. They turn brown and withered, and they fall off the tree and they die on the floor. And this is foreshadowing that the Assyrian soldiers, who were strong like summer leaves, will eventually, at the end of the battle, end up dead and scattered like autumn leaves. Now, when you have a simile that's used many times throughout a piece of writing, and the writer explores different aspects of the simile, you can call this an extended simile. The second line of stanza 2, that host with their banners at sunset were seen. This shows that the Assyrian army, who are referred to as a host here, they were referred to as a cohort in stanza 1, that these are both sort of synonyms for army. They were proudly displaying their banners. There was a sort of arrogance. They were waving their flags. Look, here we are. We're going to defeat you tomorrow. I want you to contrast that with the fourth line of stanza 2 that says that host. So we have the repetition of that host, that army, on the morrow, morrow meaning tomorrow, will lay withered and strown. So contrast their arrogance of waving the banners in the second line compared to the actual consequence, what happens to them, that they all lay dead and scattered on the battlefield the next day. Again, we have our rhyming couplets, green and seen, blown and strown. Again, we have our anapestic tetrameter throughout the poem. One thing I didn't comment on in stanza 1, but you see in stanza 2 and throughout the poem, is end stopping. End stopping is when you have punctuation at the end of the line. So for example, we have commas, colons and full stops in this particular stanza. And the effect of this is it makes you stop at the end of the line and consider what you've read before. It also, alongside the rhyming couplets and the meter, the anapestic tetrameter, contributes to this sort of galloping or marching effect, this rhythm, this beat that carries us through this narrative poem. Moving on to stanza 3, this is when the angel of death arrives. For the angel of death spread his wings on the blast. So what you want to know is angel and death is capitalized, so that's creating a proper noun. So it's saying that this angel is a person. The angel of death spread his wings on the blast and breathed in the face of the foe as he passed. And the eyes of the sleepers waxed deadly and chill, and their hearts but once heaved and forever grew still. First thing I want to look at is the alliteration. In the second line of the third stanza, we get F from face and F from foe, creating a f sound. This is, it almost sounds like the alliterating the F sound almost makes the sound of someone tired. F. If you couple this with the fourth line of the third stanza and the alliteration of the H sound in hearts and heaved, it kind of makes it sound like the Assyrian soldiers were trying to run away from the angel of death as they were getting struck down. So they were running away, but there was no escape from this supernatural angel of death who struck them down. I also want to look at the contrast between the words breathed and heaved. I find it interesting that the angel of death breathed on people, particularly the Assyrians, and in doing so actually removed their breath. They once heaved, their lungs heaved up and down with air, but now their lungs have grown forever still. They no longer breathe. So it's almost like a juxtaposition of sorts. The angel of death is breathing on the Assyrian soldiers, and the breath of the angel of death has taken away the breath of the once living soldiers. I did a bit more reading of my Bible, and in the book of Revelation there's a lot of associations with angels and breathing, and in particular fire. It doesn't actually say in the Bible in 2 Kings how the angel of death killed 185,000 Assyrians, and Lord Byron doesn't mention in his poem how the actual killing took place. So you can use your imagination here. You can imagine it how you want. Did the angel of death breathe physical fire, metaphorical fire? Did it breathe madness into the soldiers? Some biblical accounts say that angels' tongues are like swords, so maybe did the angel of death sort of open its mouth and cut people and kill the soldiers? No one really knows, so let your imagination run wild with that. But what we do know is that the angel of death is very true to its name, and it came down and it killed 185,000 Assyrians, according to the Bible and according to Lord Byron. Again, we have our rhyming couplets, blast and past, chill and still. What I would point out here is that these rhymes are quite violent. Blast sounds like an explosion. Past is like a euphemism for someone dying, passing away. Chill and still, this refers to rigor mortis. So when a human body dies and blood stops pumping around the body goes from being warm, 37 degrees, to being chilled, cold to the touch. And again, one definition of something that's alive is that it moves. When something stops moving, when something is still, we can say it's dead. So these rhymes are particularly deadly and harrowing. Again, the meter, the anapestic tetrameter, carries through this stanza along with the end stopping. Okay, we move on to stanza 4. And there laid a steed. Steed is a synonym, another word for a horse. And the horse is symbolic of power. So at the time, in these this biblical era, livestock was a human's most prized and treasured possession. Maybe in modern society, we really value having big houses or fast cars or swimming pools or whatever it is, lots of fashionable clothes. In the time of the invasion of Jerusalem by King Sennacherib, owning livestock would have been a symbol of power. And the Assyrians would have placed their power in their steeds and their horses, because they could ride them into battle. They were faster than humans, more powerful than humans. So the steed is a symbol of power, and here we get a really detailed image of a dead horse. The Assyrians' power has been slain, has been completely destroyed by God and his angel of death. So the steed's nostrils are wide. It cannot breathe pride. Horses are quite big, strong, proud creatures. But when you take away its breath, it loses all that pride. It dies. It looks less impressive. It looks weak. And the foam of his gasping. So this horse has died in some kind of horrible way that it started to foam at the mouth. Again, we don't know how the angel of the Lord killed the soldiers and the horses, but it was clearly in a painful and torturous way, because the horse was foaming at the mouth. And we get a return to images of the sea, and the cold as the spray of the rock-beating surf. If you look at the fourth line of stanza 1, when the blue waves roll nightly on deep Galilee, the sea is presented as calm and powerful. At this stage, the Assyrian army is calm because they believe they're going to win the battle, and they are powerful. They are ordained in purple robes and gold, and they are numbered like the stars in the sky. It's almost certain they're going to win. There's a definitiveness about it, and the imagery of the sea makes them look powerful in stanza 1. But contrast that to the image of the sea in stanza 4, which is very violent and deadly. When waves break onto a rocky shore, they spray the rock-beating surf. There's spray of cold water. The sea can beat and crack rocks and crack, bones and skulls. And this is the imagery of the sea being a violent place. And it was the violence of the angel of the Lord that ultimately destroyed the Assyrian army that was once calm like a lake. Again, we have our rhyming wide pride surf turf, and again we have anapestic tetrameter, and once again we have end stopping throughout the poem. Moving on to the 5th stanza, we get a different symbol. In stanza 4, we focus on the symbolism of the steed. In stanza 5, we focus on the symbolism of the rider, of the human. Now, we know that Romantic poets and the Romanticism movement was fascinated in humans and nature and their relationship. And at the start of this poem, humans were very confident. The Assyrian army and King Sennacherib were very confident that they could waltz into the kingdom of Judah and the capital Jerusalem and conquer it. They put a lot of trust in their human ability. But what happened was the angel of the Lord, which you could argue is maybe a natural phenomenon or maybe a supernatural phenomenon, going back to the idea that romantics were interested in the unknown, in the spiritual side of life, has had an effect on humanity. And actually we learn that humans should not be as confident in themselves as they are at the start of the poem, that there are bigger forces at work, such as nature, or maybe such as the supernatural, such as gods and angels. So here we have an image of a rider who is very much dead, a bit like its horse, very dead, looking very weak and sorry for itself. Its body is distorted and pale. There is dew on the brow of the soldier. Dew is that water that you get in the morning. So the body was killed overnight by the angel of death, and now we're looking at the body in the morning, and dew, moisture, has settled on the soldier's skin. And there's rust on his mail. Mail refers to chain mail here, so armour. And I want you to compare that to stanza 1. Line 2 of stanza 1. The cohorts, the army, the soldiers' armour was purple and gold. It had these colour connotations of wealth and power. Now looking at line 2 of stanza 5, the same soldiers' armour and weapons are rusty. Rusty has that sort of orangey brown colour, maybe a bit like an autumn leaf, an orangey brown colour, the colour of death and decay. The tents were silent, so imagine a campsite of 185,000 people. There would be so much noise. Not only the people, there was thousands of animals as well, such as horses. So it really should have been a noisy, raucous scene, but Byron tells us it was silent. Everything was dead. Horses, humans, everything. The banners are alone. Going back to those banners in line 2 of stanza 2 that were waving proudly before the battle, they are now alone. There are no humans to hold the banners upright. The banners are discarded on the floor. All of that human arrogance and power of the Assyrian army has been completely destroyed by the supernatural angel of the Lord, angel of death. The lances, a lance is a type of weapon, are unlifted, and the trumpet unblown. In the biblical era, when you went into battle, it was quite common to bring musicians, particularly trumpet players, to make a loud, intimidating noise. But as we know from the 3rd line of this stanza, everything was silent. There was no noise. Silence is the sound of death. You can't move, you can't make a noise. So if things are silent, there is death. And here we have widespread death. 185,000 people plus many, many more horses dead. Interestingly, in this stanza, this is the only stanza where we really see caesura. And the caesura, as we know from previous videos, is punctuation in the middle of the line that's designed to break up the line and slow it down and bring your attention to certain images, such as in the second line of stanza 5, the dew on the brow of the soldier, and in the third line of stanza 5, the silence that we observe in this military camp. And actually in the fourth line as well, the lancers being unlifted, drawing our attention to the fact everyone is dead. So we move on to the sixth and final stanza, and the widows of Asher are loud in their wail. In stanza 5 we had silence, now we have wailing in stanza 6, so there's a contrast of sound here. Wailing is like an excessive crying, and a widow is someone who has lost their husband. So the widows of Asher is a city in the Assyrian Empire, are all crying because they've lost their husbands. Now there was 185,000 dead soldiers, so we can assume there's about 185,000 wives, mothers, sisters who are mourning their dead relatives. And if you have 185,000 people all crying, that is a huge noise. That is definitely a wail. And that's a very onomatopoeic sound that Byron has used to try and evoke that sense of noise and loss and misery in the Assyrian people. The idols are broke in the temple of Baal, going back to the conflict between the Christian and the Jewish and the Muslim, that monotheistic, that one God, versus idols and polytheistic gods such as Baal. It is quite clear here that this God, the one true living God, has destroyed the people who worship the many idols. And the might of the Gentile. Gentile is a Jewish word for someone who doesn't believe in the one true God. So the might of the Gentile is the might of the Assyrians, people who believe in these false gods, these idols. And they have previously been unsmote by the sword. No sword of man could kill the Assyrians. They were the most powerful force on earth in that region at the time. However, these Gentiles, these Assyrians, these people who don't believe in the one true God, who believe in idols, have melted like snow. Look at this simile here. Human beings have turned into snow in the sun, melted away, absorbed by the earth, never to exist. And all that the one true God had to do to make this happen was glance at the Assyrians. Just that verb, glance. Just a quick little look, quickly send down his angel of death, and this mighty empire that existed for thousands of years, that conquered a fair chunk of the Middle East and the Mediterranean and Africa, is all but defeated. Compare this simile in the final line to the simile we see in the very first line. The Assyrians came like a wolf in the fold. They were wolf-like, they were violent, they were powerful. Line 1. The final line of the poem, the Assyrians have melted like snow in the glance of the Lord. They're dead, they're no more. There is a complete contrast here. There's a sort of cyclical structure through the similes. There's a simile at the beginning, and then Byron recounts this historical episode from the biblical version, and then there is a simile at the end to bring it to a close. Again, we have end stopping, we have rhyming couplets, we have anapestic tetrameter throughout. Well, you've stuck with me this long. Very well done indeed. My advice would be to make notes from this video and a physical copy of the poem, and you can go on to answer the question, how does Byron explore pre-war and post-war in the Destruction of Sennacherib? So we know this anthology is all about conflict, so if I was you, I would conflict the pre-war and the post-war. Before the battle, the Assyrians looked very confident. Look at some of those similes and colour connotations, some of those language devices. However, post-war, they were utterly destroyed. Again, you've got some symbolism, you've got some similes you can pick out, some onomatopoeia. Structurally, how does the anapestic tetrameter, the rhyming couplets, the end stopping, etc., the contrast, how does that contribute to this pre-war, post-war comparison? And finally, are there any poetic techniques in particular? Looking at maybe some of the contrast, some of the caesura, some of the end stopping. How does this add to the effect that there is conflict as a contrast between the pre-war and post-war effects in the Destruction of Sennacherib by Lord Byron? So if you found this video useful and enjoyable, please give it a like. Please also consider subscribing to my channel so you can see the rest of the OCR conflict anthology poetry analysis videos I make, and please also leave a comment if you think there's anything I missed out that you would like to share. Well, thank you for your attention, and I'll see you on the next one.